everyone. I hope that you're able to see me and you're able to hear me. I am going to be talking about, my name is Maps Bolt, Loretta Maps Bolt. So I hope that you guys saw what I was going to do. Maybe you saw what I was going to talk about during the IG Live. But I am the founder and owner of Cannatunes, and Cannatunes focuses on multidisciplinary mediums of music to create soundscapes for the plants. And so I used to be a cannabis farmer in Northern California for a number of years, and I was intrigued by the idea of hearing plants play live to the audience while you're consuming the cannabis. And I just wanted to say too that cannabis, as well as all other plants, has an intelligence and a physical being and an aura inside of it, and that every time that you're using cannabis, you're consuming the intelligence and the relationship it had with the farmer. And so when we're doing that, we should be taking a moment to appreciate that, to take in all of the love and effort and kindness that went into creating this medicine for you. And whether or not you use it recreational or medicinally, it is a healing that is happening for you. And that healing is happening by an intelligence that's from the earth. And when you're connecting with that being, you're basically co-creating with it. It's a interspecies collaboration, I like to call it. And so I just wanted to just take even just a small nug, and I know that we're going to be talking about psychedelics, and especially African American uses and African uses, but I just wanted to share a little bit of my story with psychedelics and how cannabis sort of led me to psychedelics, and caused me to start giving serious thought about what it is to take in knowledge and fully embody it. So I went to college for environmental law at SUNY ESF. And when I was there, I was going to school to basically learn as much about environmental science as possible, but I was overwhelmed by all of the jargon and all of the labs we had to take, and it was very intense, to be honest. And my freshman year was very difficult, as freshman years go. That's just how it happens sometimes. But it wasn't until I was using cannabis that I felt calm enough to sort of like let my shoulders down, let my hair out, and really like ease in to learning, because coming from high school straight into college is an adjustment. It can be jarring. And so cannabis definitely helped me with that transition. But it wasn't until that I was consuming mushrooms that I was able to finally understand all these things I was learning in botany and zoology, mycology, dendrology. Pretty much all my classes ended in ology. It was really intense. And so I just remember one specific time when I was tripping on mushrooms out in the woods, which was basically where we were learning. We were taking all of our classes outside. It was an environmental school. And I took a moment and I was watching the trees breathe, how you like see the trees breathe sometimes. And I saw the xylem and the phloem working together up through the tree. And I just basically could finally visualize all of this scientific jargon that had basically blinded me. It was just too dense, too heavy for me to consume. And um, the mushroom became my partner in that journey. And at that time, of course, especially being on scholarship as one of the few Black people at an environmental school, I couldn't go around running around being like, I just learned how to understand botany on mushrooms, like that, you know, haha, like can't be saying that. So I was definitely in a cradled environment. A lot of the kids there were mostly white. The school actually only had a 3% minority rate, and that wasn't just for Black people, that was like all minorities. And so um, it was interesting having this own private journey, and also the mushrooms was helping me heal childhood trauma, which was also stopping me from being able to really like experience the medicine, or like experience the learning and the people and the relationships that I was in. And so that actually got me to start looking into ancient uses of psychedelics, because I felt so profoundly moved by how I was actually learning with this medicine, with this intelligence, with the mushroom. And it felt like it was my guide. And so I learned about ibogaine, and this was long before people really started talking about it, but I had already been learning about it around like 2004, 2005, where people were using it for addiction recovery, and how people were actually taking secret trips to Africa to ingest this medicine. But then I also found out about really amazing things, where there was the blue lotus flower in Egypt. This flower actually doesn't exist anymore. It's totally extinct. It's gone. Maybe we can bring it back. I have no idea. Hopefully not a GMO version. But basically, this lotus, blue lotus, the Egyptians claimed that they used it for dream time, almost in the same way that the Aboriginal people of Australia used it for dream time. A lot of their speaking about it, it reminds me a lot of the way that the Aboriginal people talk about song lines. And if you don't know anything about song lines, they're not physical lines. It's this idea that you're going out into the wilderness, you're putting yourself out there, and you're allowing your energy to find its energy line to a certain extent, and then that energy line will come and bring you on a journey. So you almost have to find it through intuition. And that's where I want to start coming into the notion of Hikoi. Hikoi is also an Aboriginal term from Australia that is a little bit different than going on walkabout for a song line. A Hikoi is actually a traditional way of doing a protest. So it's a walking meditation almost, and you're doing it where the protest is the walking itself, and you're doing it in a meditative way. It's a little bit like a pilgrimage to a certain extent, but with I don't want to say a deeper purpose, but with a different sort of energy and intention. And there is a gentleman who actually recently just went on this really amazing Hikoi in Australia, where he, and this is just like an example, and I'll talk about why I'm speaking about this in a moment. But a gentleman went on a Hikoi in Australia to promote the rights of the river as a person, and so he went on this pilgrimage, this Hikoi, where the river was his companion. And so as he went down the river and followed the river, about, I think it was a 30, 40-mile walk that he did, he would stop and talk and rest and sleep with the river, and really fully integrate the river as his companion. And that's how he would present his Hikoi. Now, I'd like for you guys to sort of take a moment and think about that when it comes to cannabis, right? And I'd like to take a moment to also um, just if you wanted to maybe take a moment with me as well, just to like close your eyes, take a deep breath, maybe shake out, you know, we've heard a lot of great things and stuff, and just want to shake out, make some space for ourselves. Yeah, great. And what I want you to do next is I want you to envision cannabis as a spirit. And when I say cannabis as a spirit, it can be an animal, it can be just any shape, it could be a person, it could just be a color, it could be anything that you want it to be, right? And I want you to hold that image inside of you for a moment. And I want you to sort of immerse yourself in it, right? Now I want you to take a big deep breath as if you were inhaling the very essence of this being of cannabis. And we're going to do it on 3. 1, 2, 3. Breathe in. 1, 2, 3. Breathe out. And now what I want you guys to do is in the future, try to do this when you're using cannabis, okay? Because this will bring you into a more intimate relationship with your cannabis, because it'll, I believe, it'll allow you to fully indulge yourself in the intelligence inside of the plant. And this goes for even when you're using psychedelics. We often think that when we're ingesting this medicine, that what you're experiencing is just a reaction. That might not be true. What I'm trying to talk to you guys about is this idea of experiencing an intelligence. And some people think that, you know, mushrooms is even an alien intelligence, and that some people feel that a lot of these psychedelics were given to us by other beings or other gods or other universes, and spores have the possibility of traveling through space. And so when we're thinking even about cannabis, I mean, the Dogon tribe believe that the cannabis was given to us by people from Sirius. And so when we're using these medicines, right, try to reach out, try to interact with these intelligences, these beings, ask them questions, right? See what answers you get. And you might not get even answers right at that moment. You might get them later on in your life or the next day. I've often had situations where I have like revelations years later, and I'll be like, oh, that's what that mushroom trip meant. And so I know that the topic of discussion for this talk was basically the secret history of psychedelic use. Well, I did want to share something that I don't believe a lot of people are aware of, but Alice Walker actually wrote a beautiful book in 2004 that talked about the use of yage. And if I'm pronouncing that incorrect, please tell me in the chat. But this book was the first book that I ever read that had an African American woman talking about the use of psychedelics. And that was pretty rare back then. I mean, this was 2004. I found the book in 2007. And so it definitely was a real eye opener. It made me feel more accepted, especially somebody who is so famous as Alice Walker. And especially when you're talking about writing and sharing your experience. Now, the book isn't about her, it's a novel, but the book really digs deep into meditation and shamanism and these self-reflecting journeys that we go into when we're using these types of medicines. it's definitely a journey, and it can also be fun, and sometimes it can be sad and bitter. You know, I've definitely had those moments where I've been, you know, curled up on the couch listening to the same Fish album for 5 hours and just hoping it would end. But yeah, those things happen. But I reading this book, and also the character in the book goes through a series of these situations where they have good trips and bad trips. But it made me feel like this was like more normalized, which I think we should be promoting more. And what I believe is the secret history of psychedelics really is just our use of psychedelics. We just haven't felt really confident in sharing those experiences. When I was in college, you know, I wanted to say that, you know, in botany class, who my teacher actually was Robin Wall Kimmerer, the person who wrote Braiding Sweetgrass, if you're familiar with that book. But I couldn't raise my hand and say, hey, actually, the mushrooms taught me this about botany yesterday. Even though I wanted to so badly, I couldn't share those experiences. But somebody gave me that book when I had just left college, and it sort of filled this void that I felt like I had when I was there, because I didn't feel like I had anybody there at that college. Were not into psychedelics and wary of them. But I wasn't scared, and I also wasn't, even though I knew I couldn't raise my hand in class, I wasn't really too worried about my reputation per se. Um, I I guess I've always kind of like been that person a little bit to a certain extent, where I'm I don't put a lot of stock into other people's thoughts about me too much. You know, I think it's a little bit more important to focus on you, and you know, make sure that you feel good in your heart. So I always felt good about my use of psychedelics, and I would always be open with it when I would talk to people about it. But now that I've moved into animism with making music with plants and creating these interspecies collaborations with plants, it's gotten into a space where all of this stuff is just obvious to me. Where we're just it's so clear to me that, yeah, everything that's alive has its own language, has its own way of communicating, and this is on the spirit level too. I mean, we can interact with a lot of these beings that are in our ephemeral sort of space, and those beings become more real to us when we're using psychedelics as well. And so I think that it's important for us to share our stories, especially when it comes to psychedelics, and a lot of things that haven't been spoken about is the use of psychedelics for healing, for trauma. I mean, as an African American woman, I definitely have a lot of race based trauma that I definitely came to terms with, using acid and using cannabis, of course. And I was really excited to share that story with people, especially when I started using the cannabis music as a storytelling device. Now, you'll be able to listen to music on my website, but what I'm hoping is that other people will start looking for other mediums to interact with cannabis and cannabis plants, because that's a whole other like world that we haven't really tapped into in terms of communication with plants. And when I'm pulling data off these plants, I'm using the electrical currents in the plants and I'm translating into musical notes. But that data can be turned into a multitude of mediums. It doesn't have to be music, it can be light, and it can be cymatics, it can be um, other types of visualizations. And there's lots of opportunities there for communication with not just cannabis, but also mushrooms. I think that there's a lot of intelligence, whether you're using fruiting bodies or just the mycelium. It's it's really crazy, all of the intelligence that mushrooms have inside of them, especially when you think about them being the networks between all the things that are living in an ecological space. And so I just wanted to take a little bit of time. If anybody had any questions, I don't know if I can read questions in the chat. I'm not quite sure if I know how to, but um, what I'm hoping is that you guys can always reach out to me on Instagram if you ever have any questions about plant music. But I'm just gonna take a little drink right now, and then I'm gonna take a little bit of a bong rip. But I'm gonna start talking about something a little bit different that also has to do with plants and music, but also the intelligence of plants. So about 2 years ago, I was able to get into this really interesting project around ginseng. Now, you're probably like, what are you talking about ginseng for? I thought this was about like psychedelics and cannabis. Hold on there. I'll be there in a moment. Basically, what I found out was when I did this project on ginseng, I uncovered, and it's not like I discovered it, I just happened to come upon it, so I uncovered it for myself. But I uncovered or discovered for myself this Cherokee story that speaks about ginseng being the grandfather of all plants. And it's really interesting because the story basically goes through the mediation of all the animals and insects in the world, trying to figure out what to do about the humans and whether or not we should be working with them, and or if they should be working with them, or if they should be working with us, sorry. um and they came up with all these different ways to basically uh make us not exist. You know, they would come up with different types of ways to, like, you know, bees things. So insects would do different types of things, and you know, animals would do other types of things. But they eventually got to a point where they couldn't figure out what to do, and they came to grandfather ginseng. So if you'll give me a moment, I'm just going to read this story to you guys really quick. And it's the story, I just wanted to give honor to this story. I found it through the ginseng project that I did. And I think it has a lot to do with cannabis, because when we talk about ginseng being the grandfather of all plants, I often think of cannabis being the grandmother of all plants because it has that sort of like opposite side to it. And I think it's natural healing and compassion that it's embedded into it, into the intelligence of cannabis, um, is what we're feeling when we're using it. And with ginseng, that has lots of different elements, but um, in this story, it goes through why they call ginseng the grandfather of, or how he, as the grandfather of all plants, was able to do it. So it's also really interesting because he comes up with a interesting way to handle the problem. So if you'll give me about 5 minutes, I'm going to read this story to you guys. And the following story comes from Lori Q, a generational digger, as told to her by David Winston on the Bear Alchemy website. Okay, and this is the story. In the beginning of this world, when life was new, all manner of new creatures came into this world. There was Awi the deer, Ivna the bear, Justu the rabbit, Gili the dog, Suli the buzzard, and many others. Last of the creatures born was a strange new animal called man. In those days, every living thing could communicate with one another because they spoke a common language. People could talk to animals or the water, the plants, the fire, or the stones. All beings respected and understood each other and only took what each needed to live. But gradually, within man, something began to change. People forgot that they were part of one great life. They neglected to maintain a harmonious way of living and being. They would take more than they need and show disrespect for the other creatures. Instead of taking one deer, they would kill an entire herd, taking only the choice meat and leaving the rest to rot. They poisoned whole pools of fish, and instead of catching a few, they took the whole. They trampled insects and other small creatures through dislike or carelessness. As people continued to separate themselves from the rest of the great life and disregarded the laws of nature, they forgot how to speak the original language. When the animal nations came together in council, they would ask, "What do we do about the problem of man?" The bear nation held a council, and the great white bear asked his people this question. Their answer was to declare war on man, to give themselves a chance against the more numerous and aggressive man. They decided to make themselves a bow and arrow. When it was made, one of the warrior bears drew back the bow and fired. The arrow flew wildly, landing nowhere near the target. The bear offered to chop off his claws so that he could be a better bowman. But the great white bear stopped him, reminding the bears that the great life had provided the bears with their claws and teeth to feed and to defend themselves. If they tried to change what they were, then they become no better than man. Hearing this, all the bears agreed, and the council was disbanded. Over the years, other animal nations held their councils, but they too could come to no conclusion what to do about the problem of man. Finally, the creeping, crawling nations, the insects, held a council, and they decided to give man disease. And they shouted out the name of each disease: liver disease, heart disease, pain in the joints, fever. These illnesses came into the world. Every man, woman, and child was afflicted, and many died, but a few began to recover. So, in order to rid themselves of man completely, the chief of the insects, the white grub worm, went to the chief of the green people, Grandfather Ginseng. He asked Grandfather Ginseng to help the insects totally destroy mankind. The plants are a patient people, and the ginseng plant asked for 4 days to pray and think about the decision. After 4 days, Grandfather Ginseng said, "We have heard your words, and there is much truth in them. People have hurt and abused us much more than they have you. But we also understand that man is still young and foolish, and we are all part of the same great life. So we have decided that if people come to us in a good way, in a sacred way, we will help them by giving them the cure for every disease which you, the insects, have made. This is a promise made to us by the green people, and to this very day, they honor their pledge by providing us with food and medicine. It is still a common practice among Cherokee herbalists to walk through the woods, allowing needed medicine to announce itself by unusual shaking or other obvious signs." And so that is the story of Grandfather Ginseng. And I would love for you guys to reflect on that a little bit, and especially when we're talking about what it is to accept people in our lives and to make way for different ideas of what being is. It's so fluid. And if we could even tap into this idea that plants are alive and they have their own essence and intelligence and things like that, there should be no question about um, what we're expecting from each other when we're talking about our experiences, our diversity of nature, our diversity of identity. And so I really find this story to be super uplifting, even though it definitely has a lot of, shadiness about it in it, where, all these beings, we were trying to come up with ways to get rid of us. But you know, it's also goes to the fact that they're almost just as determined as us. And so when we're talking about intelligence inside of plants or insects or animals, I mean, we already know that animals have intelligences, but the very souls, the very energetic nature inside of the plants can be animalistic at sometimes. And you know we often get into colonial verbiage when we're talking about plants. We'll say certain things are invasive, but what does that really mean? I mean, people migrate, animals migrate. Wouldn't plants migrate too? And wouldn't we be vehicles for their migration? Michael Pollan wrote a book that delves deeper into this idea about what are the secret desires inside of these other intelligence that we just talk about plants. And when we talk about cannabis, sometimes we think we found the cannabis, but maybe the cannabis found you. Maybe that's what happened. And just be open to that. I think that that is always a really great way to uh, sort of accept these new energies and energy beings sort of into your space. And when you're using cannabis and you're using like different types of strains, be aware of that. And also like don't be afraid to seriously ask questions when you get there. And the closer of a relationship you can have with the farmers, the better off you are, honestly, because there's so much that goes into the relationship that the farmers have. If you ever meet a farmer of cannabis, you'll know that there's a lot of talk about their ladies and their women, and these are their babies. It's a different sort of farming relationship that you have with cannabis as opposed to, farming some kale or just some tomatoes. It's a different situation, especially when you're growing it as medicine. You know that there's an energetic being existing inside of that plant that's going to bring healing to somebody. And so when we're about to take a toke or even use an edible, I think it's good to make like, you don't have to do it every time, but it's good for that, even just that one jar you get, you know, you go to the dispensary, you get your new bag, you get your new edible or whatever, but like making sure that you just take like one little nug out of the jar or like one little bite and then just taking that little 5 minutes and just fully immersing yourself into it in the full gratitude, the full love, the full effort and energy that went into it, from the growing to the harvesting to the trimming to all the miles it's gone to get into the dispensary, and then the people who have, like there's so much. We talk about this when we talk about our organic food, but we don't talk about this when we talk about our cannabis. And so I think that we need to have larger conversations about what it is to really like bring this industry forward where it's different than other types of agricultural industries, because it's so close to getting washed up into something that's just nationally recognized as just another consumer product, and it's not. And even though I believe that there's being an essence and intelligence inside of every plant, I think that cannabis has a real opportunity, as well as psychedelics, to prove it so. And the conversations that you have inside of yourself, the conversations you have with other people when you're using cannabis, these are all just like conduits to a certain extent of like how that intelligence is bringing itself out. One of the things I notice a lot is when I'm eating mushrooms, I often want to eat things like food. I want to drink water. I want to like taste things, you know. I want to eat that cake. And I sort of realized after a while that it's not me that wants to eat the cake. It's the mushrooms. The mushrooms doesn't have a body. You know what I mean? They don't have the physical ability to open the fridge and drink something, but they're using us as a vehicle. And so when you're using cannabis and then you're like filled with compassion and filled with love, there's a small possibility that now the cannabis is using you as a vehicle to fully experience that love and compassion that's embedded inside the intelligence of that plant. And so I'm just going to take a little smoke and just like do what I usually do. And what I'll usually do too is I'll just take a little moment, take a nice deep breath in, be grateful for all the people that brought me this cannabis wherever they are now. I'm hoping more blessings upon them, more safe travels. And then I'm just going to take this rip. And I just want to hold it in there a little bit. Pet my dog a little bit. And then let it out. Also, air is a very powerful medium, you know? And so there's something to when you're smoking cannabis as well. I attended a ceremonial tobacco ritual by a Native American leader, and a lot of it was focused on this idea of prayer and using the air that you're breathing in and out that is being infused with smoke as a way to pray. And so you're basically almost like holding in an intention. And then when you smoke, you basically imbue that smoke with that intention, right? And then the idea is that you're blowing it out, and then that air is now becoming embodied with the universe. And then now your intention is now out there. And I think that that is also a really great little ritual or thing that you can do for yourself to sort of manifest things with the intelligence of your cannabis. And it could be interesting to seek out certain cannabis types for certain types of intelligences. So, you know, when you want to like be really, obviously, when you want to like seek out creativity and things like that, sometimes a sativa will be great for that because it'll hype up your energy, you know, it'll get your mind thinking and stuff. Just gotta be a little careful. You don't want to, you know, get those wheels spinning too fast. Um, that's where like a hybrid might be good to come in. But also like looking at the genetics, you know, of your cannabis. A lot of people will just call things whatever, you know, they're runts and skittles and gelato and gelati and, you know, Jack Herrera, all these things, Bruce Ban, you know, there's all these different name strains, right? It can get confusing. It can become overwhelming. There's always something new, right? But if you can go and look at the real genetics of these strains, look at the back crosses, fully understand like what this cannabis is mixed with, and it'll give you an idea of the energetic being that is about to be manifested when you break into this medicine. Um, and so I really hope that this has been super informative to people. I hope that I was able to open people's minds up a little bit about plants having their very own intelligence inside of them that you can access, and the conversations that you can start discovering inside of yourself as an interspecies collaboration with these plants. And this doesn't have to be with just, cannabis or psychedelics, but this can happen even when you're just eating a simple tomato, or anything. Really think about the intelligence that, the messages that it's bringing, to be aware, if you're having like different thoughts, jot them down. Automatic writing is a really interesting way to sort of channel this energetic knowledge. I've been just starting to tap into this, the automatic writing. It's got a lot of creative avenues, and you might be able to basically channel some of these energy beings that are inside of these plants. That could be a really cool thing to do. And I have been I've been practicing as much as I could, or I can, with cannabis in that way. And I've done everything from like, crazy drawings to weird poems and stuff like that. So have fun with it, be creative, see where it takes you. Also making beats, if you're musically inclined. Music obviously is a medium that I use with Cannatunes, and you always can check me out on Instagram at Cannatunes, Cannatunes. And there's music is a great way to show the intelligence, the emotional resonation inside of a plant, and it can come through you. So sometimes when you're creating new art or new music, you can think of it as like this collaboration with the plant, that like, you and OG Kush wrote this song, or you and Blue Dream wrote this song, this song was written by Cherry AK. Like, um, that could be really cool. And I think it's already happening. I think just people are scared to be upfront with it. And I think encouraging conversations among us, when it comes to the knowledge that we've gotten with psychedelics and cannabis, is like what we need. And there's been a lot of times in my life where I felt that, oh, I made that decision because I was smoking this specific strain, or I was in this way because, I was using this type of cannabis, or I was using this form of cannabis. I know that dabbing is really intense for me. I can't just be dabbing all day and stuff like that. And I really prefer bong rips, but when I'll like just smoke from a bowl or something like that, I'm not getting that full experience that I'm used to. I don't feel like I'm fully connecting with the plant like I'm used to. But that's not always a bad thing. That might just be um, just a different way of communicating. And so when you're consuming cannabis, it can be something where you're basically like entertaining that intelligence through your physical form. Like, you eat an edible, you can feel it in your fingertips, you can feel it in your toes, as opposed to when I'll just take a bong rip it'll just be very cerebral for me. I'll feel my body relax and stuff, but it doesn't feel like cannabis is completely infused inside of my skin. Um, so yeah, that's basically what Cannatunes is all about. You can listen to the library of music if anybody ever wants to reach out to me and they want to hear a specific strain. I'm always down for it. And if you have a dispensary, I'm always looking to create installations inside of the dispensary where people can listen to their cannabis before they purchase it, and then they can download it and listen to it after. But yeah, I'm super excited and grateful to be part of this Tokeativity event. Shout out to the Tokeativity women for keeping this up, keeping it going. I was super stoked to meet them in person when they came out to Philly, and I'm super glad to just be connected to them still. Even in the small amount of time I've heard and talked to some really amazing people and women, and it's just been, I mean, it's so exciting and inspiring to hear about everybody's great work, how creative people are, and all these new inroads that we're using to enter into the space. And just to like wrap up really quick, I just wanted to like end on this thought of if you do have a cannabis business that you're running, and you're thinking about what the future is going to be for your business, right? And how you're going to expand it, how you're going to grow it and connect with other people. These might be interesting questions you can ask the cannabis, you know? Like when you're using your cannabis, like straight up ask it, and see what answers come to you. That's where the automatic writing could be interesting. Because you see, if you ask and you get into a place where you're not judging your intuition, you're not in constant criticalness of what you're getting, then and you're more open to your own messages inside of you, um, you can ask these questions and the cannabis will give you interesting responses. I've done it with the cannabis music, and also just plant music in general. One example is that when I started to learn how to do geofencing, so with biotunes and all the other plant music, I started doing learning how to code geofencing because I got to a point where I was out there, I was making music with plants. All this music was inside my computer. It wasn't like where I left it. I felt like I was just like grabbing content from these plants and then like walking off and leaving with my stuff and my what I grabbed from the plants. And it felt like this futuristic form of poaching, and I was like, man, this doesn't feel right. Like, how can I leave what I got, like where I found it, right? And so that's where like geofencing came in because you can lock content to GPS coordinates and you can do really interesting uh, things. And so I didn't really come to that idea until I really sat down and I smoked about it. And um, that's like something I talk about a lot. I like sit down and I smoke about it instead of like think about it. I sit down and I smoke about it because I like got those ideas by just sort of like asking the cannabis, what can I be doing with this plant music, or what should I be doing with this plant music that could make me like better or in more fuller understanding of my craft? How can I dig in deeper? And it came back with me at like, hey, like, what about all this stuff in your computer? Like, is that really yours? It's really not. I mean, honestly, the plants are the musicians. So I'm just really there to find the instruments that the plants want to play through my computer. And so Sometimes they want to play a violin. Sometimes they want to play a trumpet. Sometimes they want to play a men's choir. You know, you never know. And so half the time I'm just trying to figure out what instruments or soundscapes. Oh, wait, hold. Oh, sorry. I had a lightning bug come in my room. I didn't know what that was for a second. It scared me. But hey, that's that magic coming inside my room. Uh, but yeah, I definitely asked the cannabis, and it came back at me like, hey, like you should really figure out how to get around this, how to like really share this so it's not just on a website or something like that. And so I have been using cannabis and psychedelics as my own personal teachers and guides. And I'm imploring you to do the same. And if you're interested in using music as a medium for that, you might get messages from listening to the different types of cannabis music I have on my website. You can go ahead and listen to that. But I mean, the medicine's right there in front of you. Don't be afraid to ask questions, which is what my mom said when I would go to school every day. And so, uh, yeah, that's me. I'm super stoked to talk and network with you guys all. If you guys ever have questions, you always can email me at cannatunes@gmail.com. And yeah, once again, I'm super thankful to Tokeativity and everybody. And yeah, thank you so much for joining if you've been watching me this entire time. And I think we have a couple of more minutes, but I think I'm just going to end it there. And yeah, thanks again. My name is Loretta Maps Bolt. I'm the founder of Cannatunes, and it's been a joy talking to you guys. Cheers.